Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Debunking, and this is the channel where we talk about all subjects related to education, parenting, childhood, mostly education, but we touch on all the rest too. And I am very, very lucky to have Billboard Chris in my my studio, my broadcast today, who was here once before to talk to us about fighting gender ideology in our schools. And today we're going to talk about some more about that, about his work to date, and about a specific case I think he wants to discuss with us, but mostly about how kids cannot consent. This is something he travels all over the country, all over Canada, all over the United States, trying to explain to parents that no, they cannot consent to puberty blockers. They really can't consent to this entire transition. And I want to welcome you, Chris, and thank you again for your heroism and your work on behalf of children everywhere.
Thank you. I just have conversations. I wouldn't call it heroism, but I appreciate that.
Well, considering how few people have the moral courage, even on just Twitter, like even on social media, to say what is true, to just stick up for reality, something they privately believe and think they know. And then they'll see somebody say the opposite of what they believe to be true. And instead of just saying, well, that's not true, they just stay silent. And in the face of something as upside down as gender ideology, I would say that's as bad as supporting it. So I consider it heroic at this point to just tell the truth. So, which is what you're doing.
Yeah, the world's gone a bit mad. It's pretty wild. A lot of people still don't know what's happening, but more and more are learning, and it'd be nice if some more of them would speak up. But people are losing their jobs and all that stuff, especially up here in Canada.
Yeah,
I think people come and stand out on the street with me for a few hours, and they end up getting investigated by their regulatory body. So it's totally mental up here.
Wow. And then, people think of Canada as being just like America, right? Isn't it just as free as America? And I have to explain to them, no, we have something called freedom of speech that you don't really have there, do you? Not to the same degree that we do.
Well, we do. We should have it. It's not that it's being practiced. And I wish there were more lawyers taking action on various fronts against this, because we do have freedom of speech up here. It's not written into First Amendment like you have, but it's part of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Freedom to assemble, freedom to protest, all that stuff. But under Trudeau, this country is becoming increasingly dystopian by the month. So it's a little bit concerning. I did put up a billboard that said, "I love J.K. Rowling" back in September 2020. And you would think that would be protected, but the private company run by a billionaire, who's not really running the company, but he owns it, they took it down the next day because they said Vancouver politicians said it was hate speech. So
I love J.K. Rowling is hate speech.
Yeah, that got taken down. It lasted a day. Then I did a whole bunch throughout the United States, and they all stayed up because freedom of speech is stronger down in the States for sure. We should have it up here, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it is happening.
That's terrible.
And as we saw with the trucker protests, people even had their bank accounts frozen simply for donating to a protest. It's totally crazy.
Yeah, that's, don't be humane and make sure people are warm and fed, unless you agree, with everything they do. Right. So last time we spoke, I believe it was in January. We got a sort of a high view about the puberty blockers and what they're doing and how they hurt kids and how they can't consent. Since then, I've learned a lot. You've been out talking to a lot of people. You just mentioned, you said a lot of people still don't know what's going on. Do you still run into that? Do you still run into like a lot of people who think that, what's the big deal? I mean, it's just puberty blockers, or are more people catching on that
more people are catching on. And it's not just the puberty blockers. That's the first step. It's not always the first step, but if kids are young enough, that's the first step. And then it's the opposite sex's hormones. So it's mostly girls that are transitioning these days, and they're being given testosterone, which has all sorts of terrible side effects, including infertility. Girls are having to get hysterectomies because testosterone causes vaginal and uterine atrophy. They're getting their breasts cut off as young as 13 years old, even 12 years old, actually. Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who's the head gender doctor at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, is on video talking about a 12-year-old that they did a double mastectomy on, and how it's not a big deal because if these girls want breasts in the future, they can just go buy them.
Right.
Because
we remove perfectly healthy organs. Right. Yeah. Perfectly healthy tissue that's literally designed to feed a child that the 12-year-old might someday want. See that what as a woman that bothers me so much, because there is another woman, even if it was a man, I wouldn't care, but I mean it's especially heinous. I think women have fought for so long not to be objects, where breasts are just objects, right? Yeah. That, that they're part of our bodies that serve a purpose. They're, like I said, they feed children. They're part of who we are. And to say, I just go buy them like they're a fashion accessory.
Right. If someone wanted to cut off their toes because they don't like their toes or their foot or their hand or any other body part, we wouldn't allow it. But somehow, I mean, it's weird for me to talk about this, but what, breasts are expendable? This is totally crazy. I'm going to keep talking about it because somebody has to, and the world's gone insane, and I have girls, so I'm going to fight for a more sane world for my daughters. And I've learned too much, and I've talked to too many parents to be quiet about this now. So I'll just keep on going until this is done with.
I think the thing that I've been trying to convey to parents in the past few months is, and I think it relates to the story that you wanted to talk about today too, is that this isn't just a problem that you might have between you and your child and what am I going to do if this happens? This is a way that the state can and will come between you and your child and destroy your family. And so it's, as bad as it is for your child that they might think, their dysphoria means they have to get all these interventions. If they say that to the wrong person before they say it to you, that can start a series of events, like a chain of events that could be absolutely tragic, like insanely tragic. And when I've tried to show them stories like the one we're going to talk about, people don't believe me, Chris. People don't believe me. They'll say like, well, where is the source of that? I can't find that in the news. Or why isn't the news covering this? Shouldn't the news be covering this like crazy? And maybe you can shed some light. Do you want me to bring this up and we can dive right into it if you want?
Sure. I mean, the mainstream media isn't going to report on this. They're starting to a little bit, but people don't know because this isn't covered in the news. Especially in Canada, we don't have any conservative media to counterbalance all of our crazy lying liberal media, corporate media doing the bidding of our insane government. But so this is a story of a 14-year-old girl. I think she was 13 when this all started at school. And this was hidden from her grandparents, who are they adopted her just before she had turned 2 years old. And I think we should probably just read this story. So maybe you can click on the article in a minute. But this girl ran away from home in August of last year. And she was found in Maryland. She'd been sex trafficked from Virginia to Washington, D.C. And she was found in Maryland. And let's just read this. Okay. So I'm just going to say a couple points before I get into this to quash any doubts from people. There are independent news sources verifying the exact dates when this girl disappeared. Second time she disappeared, she was gone for a couple months, and I forget which state, but we'll get into that. So this is a girl who was struggling, and all these kids are struggling. All these kids who say they are trans are all struggling with something else. Almost half of these kids have autism. If we look at the official figures from the Tavistock, which is the gender clinic in England, where all the kids funnel through, unlike the US, where there are now hundreds and hundreds of gender clinics, and we don't really have solid numbers because they don't release them. We know from England that 35% officially of those kids were on the autism spectrum. Kids who are in state care are way overrepresented. Kids who have suffered trauma or abuse or sexual abuse or who knows what. But these are all kids who are struggling with different things, and being trans is being presented as the solution for all their struggles. They don't look into what's actually causing the underlying depression or anxiety. They just say, oh, let's trans you, and that'll cause all these other problems to magically disappear. And of course, it doesn't work that way. So this girl was adopted by her grandparents when she was almost 2 years old. And let's just scroll down a little bit there. So I'm the grandmother of a 15-year-old girl, Sage Lily. I adopted her when she was just shy of 2 years old. We live in Virginia with my husband. Sage started going through gender confusion in eighth grade. To that point, she was a straight-A student who enjoyed playing piano and writing poetry. At her small school, as she informed me, all the girls were either bi, trans, or lesbian. So this is another thing going on. All these kids, especially the girls, feel like they need to identify as something these days. I've talked to thousands of people. I've probably had, 5,000, 6,000 conversations now all around North America. Teenagers come up to me all the time, and they'll frequently tell me that at least half the kids in the school are now identifying as something on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, which obviously doesn't make sense. And I just want to preface this whole thing, by the way, by saying LGB, we need to separate from the TQ plus, because these are two totally different things. Whoever you're attracted to, you're attracted to. That's great. No one really cares about anyone else's sex life, and I don't think we should be sexualizing kids. But this business going on with trans and queer theory and all that stuff is something totally different. It's not a community. There is no such thing. And we really need to separate these things and stop combining them as one, because the trans lobby is piggybacking on the LGB to gain acceptance for their crazy agenda. But at some point, social influence overcame this girl. She advised her friends and teachers that she wanted to be trans and that she would no longer go by her name. She requested to be called Draco. The school obliged, of course, since Virginia by law requires that students be affirmed. Only affirmed by the school staff. They just go along with it right away. Unfortunately, the school did not tell me, her legal mother, her grandmother, about any of this, because that's the policy in schools all across the nation, states, school districts. They will hide this from parents because parents are now deemed to be unsafe for their own children. This is nuts. Mm-hmm. So if she had known, this would be a much different story. Late August last year, she started ninth grade. She was bullied and became vulnerable. Soon she was exploited online, a fact I didn't know about until later. I'm just going to throw this in here. Parents, kids, they don't need social media. I know it's going to be hard sometimes to get kids off social media, but social media is the worst possible thing for your teenagers, especially your teenage daughters. They are being groomed, and that is the appropriate word, online, or even through video games, because they're all connected to people all over the world now with their headsets and everything. And it's a very dangerous place for them, especially if your kid is not thriving in life. They're going to find love online. They're going to find people love bombing them and giving them all the attention that they want. And so many kids are being drawn into this fantasy world where they think that changing sex is going to cure all their problems. Mm-hmm. But on August 25th, she ran away from home. The grandmother notified the local sheriff. Her case quickly escalated and the FBI and U.S. Marshals became involved. Sage had been sex trafficked from Virginia to D.C. and then transported to Maryland. The FBI and Marshals found her in a locked room at the home of the abuser at 10 p.m. on September 2nd. They called me to let me know and to inform me that I could pick her up the next morning to bring her home to Virginia. I was told she needed to stay the night at a detention center as she was being treated at the hospital and needed a rape kit completed. I was frantic, as you might imagine, and distraught that I was not allowed to see her right away. I arrived at the detention center bright and early the next morning. However, once there, I received surprising and devastating news. Sage was now being represented by a juvenile attorney and would not be allowed to return to Virginia with us, and I would not be allowed to see her until a court hearing could take place. On top of that, my husband and I were going to be investigated for abuse because we called her Sage and not Draco, and used female pronouns in reference to her rather than he, him. Now, this is where this gets really nuts. I mean, it's already totally crazy. Abuse charges were filed against my husband and myself, and Sage was put in the boys' unit of the children's home. She'd just been sex trafficked, but she identifies as a boy. So what do? It's their policy. They really have no choice, I guess. It's totally stupid, but they put her into a boys' home. And guess what? She was again abused. Following this, she was placed in a private room. Again, I was not advised that Sage was placed in the boys' unit. So now my traumatized child had been kidnapped, sex trafficked, and then sexually abused again while in the care of the state, rather than returning to her loving home to rebuild. Instead of the trauma care that Sage desperately needed when she was rescued, she was manipulated and our family was treated unfairly. Instead of getting the help she desperately needed and deserved, she was fated to experience even more pain and suffering. After an investigation by both Maryland and Virginia, the abuse charges were determined to be unfounded. Yeah, go figure. Yet Sage was still not allowed to come home. Instead, she was put on center stage to push a political and gender agenda for a Maryland public defender with clearly no knowledge of trauma caused by sexual exploitation of a child. A typical 14-year-old is emotionally immature and struggles with many issues. Sage had additional issues on top of these normal concerns, as all of these kids who identify as trans do, as she had experienced severe trauma before the age of 2. Now with this new trauma of being sex trafficked, she was even more vulnerable. Despite therapeutic residential programs in Virginia that were willing and able to accept her, the Maryland public defender attorney said Sage could not go because of the trans identification, and the Maryland juvenile court judge agreed. On November 8th, the Maryland judge finally released Sage to a facility in Virginia. This was immediately appealed the next day, and Maryland continued to retain custody of my child, hoping to place Sage in a foster home in Maryland. Why? Because I called her Sage, her legal name, and not Draco. In this case, it was simply because my husband and I forgot, because certainly desperate to get our child back, we would have done anything, including using the name Draco. Now our abused child, the victim of a federal sex trafficking crime, was being sent to a foster home because of gender ideology. There is no way to interpret that this was in my child's best interest. To make matters worse, on November 12th, Sage did not return to the children's home after school. She had run away again. She was gone for over 2 months here. Law enforcement, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and the FBI were all notified. At that point, I could only hope and pray that Sage was not back in the hands of the predators. I prayed she was still alive. Everyone should have been looking for her. Instead, the Maryland appeal remained active, and the attorneys were focused on using her to establish case law for transgender individuals. This attorney went so far as to advise my child she intended to file an appeal, and if that failed, would go to the Supreme Court. This was the Maryland attorney's main intention, and it was to be accomplished at the risk of my child's mental health and now her life. To my horror, the Maryland marshal found that Sage had been sent from Maryland to Dallas, Texas. On January 24th, 2.5 months later, the Texas marshal, through the grace of God, found her in a locked room where once again she'd been abused by a predator. He'd used her for pornography, sold her body for money, starved her, beat her, and drugged her. It was a true miracle she was found. So many children are never found, but her exploitation would never have happened in the first place, if not for the intervention of the state of Maryland. Now Sage is in a residential therapeutic facility for the next 1 to 2 years, depending on how well she responds to the program. She will struggle with these consequences for the rest of her life. She's still only 15 years old. She spent her 15th birthday in Maryland, and her grandmother was not even allowed to visit her. I cried all day that day. So that's that, Deb. And this story is, I see people, just a few people saying online that this really isn't believable. It's totally believable. This is the policy. And who knows what this girl said to authorities when she was found. Maybe she said her grandparents weren't affirming her or something.
Yeah. The problem is that we, parents, I've had that. I've had people say, well, what if they were abusing her? What if they did an investigation that was unfounded. There was no evidence of abuse. Yeah. But leaving that aside, how many times have teenagers fought with their parents over a wide variety of things. How many times have teenagers accused their parents of, being, I won't say abuse, but like, not understanding them, not, letting them be themselves, or any number of things that were not related to being trans. They won't let them stay out late, won't let them hang out with a certain group of friends. I mean, this is called being a teenager. Teenagers and parents fight. It's not great when it goes overboard, right? But it's very normal in a family where there's a teenager, and especially in this case, you've got the grandparents. So there's even more of a generation gap where there, between what they're teaching at the school about families, that families are oppressive in general, whether you're a kid lured into the trans ideology or not, they're still teaching that, the old ways, the traditional ways are bad, that parents don't have your best interest at heart. They're not affirming families. They're not affirming the values that made this, made us what we are. So you've already got that in your head, and you're a teenager, and you're getting bullied, and you're in school, and so even when people say to me, well, what if she said this? Maybe there was that. And I'm like, yeah, probably was. She probably had disagreements with her grandparents about a variety of things. That does not mean that the state is the better guardian for her than the grandparents. When we have scenarios where we see little kids and teenagers, but especially little kids, who are beaten by their birth parents, okay? And they get put in foster care, and the state is tripping over itself to return them to the birth parents. I've known people who fostered kids and who wanted to adopt, where, the parents disappeared for 2 years and they're like put in papers to adopt the child. Along comes the birth parents and said, we want our kids back. Both of them were drug addicts. Oh, we reformed our ways. The court was trying hard to get the kids back with the people who beat, abandoned, neglected, etc., and then went off and used drugs, and not with the family that lovingly cared for this child for 2 years. So my argument is, it's a function of it being the state. Stop looking at, like, well, maybe it was something wrong with the home. They don't have a problem with that when it's a different issue. They don't have a problem with it when the kid's being beaten.
Right.
But when it's, I'm not affirming your gender, suddenly the state becomes the best parent that ever lived. Yep. And that's just not likely, guys. There are so few cases where it would be appropriate for the state to intervene and say, I'm sorry, you cannot parent this child because you are going to kill him. You know what I mean? But that is really small number. It's so small. And they're making it like it's zero. All parents.
Yeah.
It's practically
zero. Statistically, it's zero. Parents know their kids, obviously, more than anyone, 1,000 times more. Parents love their kids more than anyone.
Right.
Obviously. And this is not unique. This is happening all over the country. In California, I want everyone to look up. You can look up, I'll post it on my Twitter, actually, top of my Twitter, at Billboard Chris. There's a woman named Abigail Martinez. And I met her in early March in Washington, D.C. at the Heritage Foundation.
Is this Yaley's story?
This is Yaley's story. Oh. Yaley is the girl. So this family is originally from El Salvador, I believe. And they came to America and were having a normal life here. Her daughter, Abigail's daughter, Yaley, grew up just normal girly girl, having fun, wearing princess dresses, all that sort of stuff that all of us parents can relate to. And she got into high school and started getting bullied and started having a rough time, as is pretty common, and got mixed up with the queer straight alliance group after school, who indoctrinated this girl to believe that she was really a boy trapped in a girl's body, and that the solution to her problems would be to transition. Well, like I just said, parents know their kids, and mom knew that testosterone wasn't the right thing for her daughter. And mom wasn't even, mom wasn't like I would be, extremely opposed to all of this and taking their child into the mountains to escape from all these negative influences. Mom was fine with using a different name if that was going to make her daughter happy. Like, she was just trying to get by with this situation. And she just didn't want her daughter going on testosterone because she knew that wasn't going to help her. Right. How much time have these social workers spent with these children? A couple hours, if that. And now they think they know better than the parents. So anyway, the state of California took this girl away from her mother. And by the way, this daughter was socially transitioned at school. So this is the first step. We call it social transition. This is before meds. This is changing names, changing pronouns, dressing like the opposite sex, whatever. This cements this identity into place and gets these kids on this path toward medicalization. And anyway, this girl was taken away by the state. The school had hid the social transition from her mother because they knew that her mother was a Catholic. Mm-hmm. And probably wouldn't be agreeing to change the sex of her daughter. So anyway, the state took her away. They put her into a group home with other trans-identified kids, so more of these influences. They put this girl on testosterone. And while she was separated from her mom, she knelt down in front of a train and killed herself. So, I don't like to weaponize suicide or use suicide as an argument or anything like that. That's what all these trans activists do. They say if you don't let your kids transition, that they'll kill themselves. It's not true. Yes, of course, suicidality is higher amongst this group of struggling kids. Kids who are struggling with mental health issues have higher suicidality. It doesn't mean there's this epidemic of suicides going on. We can prove that. You can go to a website called statsforgender.org and just enter suicide into the search bar. You'll find a whole bunch of articles. You can go to my website, billboardchris.com, click on puberty blockers, and then the studies section, and you'll find about 8 different articles debunking this myth. But, all these kids who end up going on to transition, it's not making their mental health better. And this isn't just me saying this. These are experts, so-called experts in the world saying this. We have Sweden doing away with this practice, very progressive country. Finland doing away with this practice. England has the Minister of Health is doing an inquiry right now, and they had a very damning report called the CASS report, which people can Google, CASS, outlining how it's just the wild, wild west of unregulated experimental so-called medicine,
right,
with no basis to support any of this stuff they're doing with kids. It's important to note that these drugs, these puberty blocking drugs that are given to kids, have never been approved by the FDA. This drug is actually a chemical castration drug that's been used on pedophiles. Mm-hmm. It's also used to treat prostate cancer and to treat endometriosis in women. But with women, they only go on this drug for 6 months because the side effects are so harsh, including bone demineralization. But they'll give this to kids for years. They'll even give it to them simultaneously with the opposite sex's hormones. And there's no real guidelines that any of these gender clinics are following. Some places will wait till kids are 16 to give the opposite sex hormones. Some places will do it at 13. And we have the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, Dr. Marcy Bowers, who is a male who now identifies as a woman. So this is a male. And I don't think we should have these trans people running these organizations because they've obviously drank the Kool-Aid and they're not the type of people who should be running these organizations. But Dr. Marcy Bowers has just admitted last week that all of the boys who start on puberty blockers at what they call Tanner stage 2, which is the very start of puberty. So for boys, this is like, 11 years old or whatever, depends when they hit puberty. All of these boys will never have any sexual function. They'll never be able to have an orgasm. They're getting sterilized. These drugs and hormones together are sterilizing these kids. Girls are having to get hysterectomies. As I said, they're getting their breasts cut off when they're minors. They're not going to have, they have struggles getting a relationship in the future. I tweet out stories of these detransitioners all the time. And if anyone wants to read these and really get up to speed in a hurry, if you spend 10 or 15 minutes on the Reddit site for detransitioners, you'll see that every single one of these kids, they're just struggling and they all have different issues going on. And this whole thing is a lie. There is no such thing as a trans child. There's never been one. There never will be one. There are boys and there are girls. Trans is nothing but a label. And historically, we had 1 out of several thousand people transitioning as adults, meaning they had this severe gender dysphoria that persisted into adulthood. and a very small number of people historically transitioned. And they adopted this label of trans. We used to call it transsexuals. Now they don't call kids transsexuals because that word has more stigma to it, right? So they give it this softer euphemism of transgender. And they're teaching kids in school now that they all have a gender identity. Nonsense. Gender identity is total and utter nonsense. But when you teach kids that they have a gender identity, what are they going to do? Now they have to figure out what their gender identity is. And if you look at all the resources, like the genderbread person, which is this cute little gingerbread man, but they don't give it a name like gingerbread man because that's a gendered term. They call it the genderbread person. It defines your gender identity as being based on your personality, your likes and dislikes, your jobs, your hobbies, your roles, and your expectations.
So the stereotypes we have fought for generations to tear down, they're putting back up and then claiming that any other concept of sex, meaning male or female, is a social construct. They literally say, here are all these social constructs: your job, your hobby, the clothes you like, etc. But your affinity for any of them, is
tomboys are now actual boys. And so I've talked to more people in the world about this than anyone, factually. And half the women I talk to tell me they were tomboys when they grew up, and
me,
and there you go. And they hated going through puberty, of course, like almost every single one. Mm-hmm. It's harder for girls, typically. They're getting sexualized and all that stuff, and their bodies are changing and all that. So yeah, what girl being presented with this option of having all these super stressful situations just go away by suddenly transitioning? Well, the ones who are really struggling, some of them are going to jump at that. And wherever this is taught in schools, you get kids right away who say that they're trans. And the most vulnerable of them end up at these gender clinics or at Planned Parenthood, getting hormones, getting puberty blockers, even without parental approval or even without parental knowledge now. For example, in Washington State, they passed a law. It went into effect January 1st of this year. Any child as young as 13 years old can get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, even surgeries, the way this bill is written, without their parents' knowledge or consent, and they can use their parents' insurance to do it. Right. And the parents won't even know. They get a bill with the procedure having been redacted. Right. So this is totally insane. The left has been completely captured by this radical wing of their party, and they aren't allowed to say no.
Well, they're allowed to.
These psychopaths.
They choose not to.
They won't. I mean,
if somebody came along, if there were anorexia clinics, if one identity was I'm an anorexic, and you must affirm my anorexia, and I want liposuction. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't let me have liposuction, you're not affirming my identity as an anorexic. I need to be, I need to be emaciated for the rest of my life. And that means getting rid of all the extra fat. So you've got to give me liposuction. And if you don't do it, you're abusing me. I would like to believe we would immediately know that something is seriously wrong. But we say amputate perfectly good, healthy breasts, mm-hmm. remove, render secondary sex organs like useless, etc. And everybody's like, oh, yes, this is the most tolerant of tolerant things. And I just don't understand when adults stopped being aware of the fact that peer pressure is real. And it's especially over the age of 11, it becomes about 60% of the influence on a child. Peer pressure. And by peers, I'm including at this point the teachers, because the teachers are making themselves into peers. Instead of keeping the relationship hierarchy what it used to be, these teachers are now inviting students in to have little TikTok clubs with them where they do little videos back and forth with each other. And if you watch, the teachers practically flirting with the students in terms of their level of intimacy and social intimacy. They're inviting the students to keep secrets. The SEL questionnaires of like, who are you closer with, your mom or your dad? They are putting themselves on a peer-to-peer relationship with the children. And that's by design as well. Because if a children have sort of natural safety boundaries, like gut instincts, part of them is given to them by us, but part is just natural, like people who are not just bigger than I am, but also in a higher, like hierarchy, I'm going to be a little more guarded around them. So if my teacher playing my teacher was, telling me to do things or telling me something was okay, I might weigh that against mom or dad. But if my teacher's like, your mom and dad don't know, that's the same equivalent as like your peer saying your mom and dad don't know what's what. Only difference is that person's giving you a grade. That person is in power over you. So you have this weird cognitive dissonance of like, my parents dropped me off here and told me to respect this person, told me to trust this person. Otherwise, why would they leave me here all day? And so they're older, they must know better, but they're also telling me to do this thing. Okay. And it's like we've completely forgotten that these kind of interpersonal dynamics are real, that they're very, very powerful in a preteen and teenager's life. And that if we don't take active steps, just like we would to prevent them from doing drugs or drinking when they're not ready or driving, under the influence of things, we're going to end up with them transitioning without, parental supervision. It's the same thing.
Yeah. They can't get a piercing. They can't get a tattoo. They can't drink. They can't drive a car. They can't have sex, but they can change sex. Mm-hmm. And what happens in adulthood? So let's take the example of these boys, and this gets a little gruesome. So just as a warning, these boys who get their puberty stopped at the onset of puberty and then go on estrogen. Well, when they do the full sex reassignment surgery, they try to create these fake vaginas for these boys called neovaginas. It's called a vaginoplasty. And what they do is they invert the penis, but because it never grew, because puberty was blocked, and these children now have a micropenis for life, even though these trans activists say puberty blockers are fully reversible, they now have a micropenis for life. What they do is they invert it, but they don't have enough tissue to do this procedure. So what do? They take a piece of their stomach lining or their colon out. And now what Dr. Marcy Bowers, president of WPATH, is doing, it's a new procedure that has been used in Brazil. They're using tilapia fish skin to form the lining of this neovagina. Frankenstein monsters, these doctors are. They all need to go to jail. And yeah, I tweet these stories too. There was a young man, I recently tweeted his story. He realizes now at about the age of 25 that he's just gay, which a lot of these boys, historically, boys with gender dysphoria, the majority grew up to be gay. And if you look at the studies, 89% of them, before we did all this puberty blocking nonsense, the vast majority just grew out of it. And the majority were gay. But anyway, this 25-year-old's figured out he's gay, but he had the neovagina procedure done years ago. And he developed what's called a fistula. It's a passageway from his urinary tract directly into his wound or his neovagina. And he's been leaking urine for 5 years, continually. Gets infections all the time. And one of these days, one of these infections is going to kill him. They can't fix it. And doctors now just want to close him up completely. But they've never done that before either. So, this person's life is basically ruined. All because they were chasing some delusion of trying to change sex. Trans is all a lie. The whole thing is a lie. Now, sure, if someone has genuine gender dysphoria and they're an adult and they've dealt with other underlying comorbidities and they're fully aware of all the side effects and everything, and their brain is done maturing, well, I guess they can do whatever they want to their body. But even when we're doing this with 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, they're still kids. I did ridiculous, stupid stuff when I was 20 years old. And they were indoctrinated as children, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And sure, they're adults, they can do what they want. But, if you want to get your tubes tied after having 1 or 2 kids, most doctors won't even do it when you're in your 20s.
No,
Because
that's true.
they know that the rate of regret amongst women is very high. And these women come back 5 years later and they say, thank you so much for not listening to me when I was 25, because now I'm 30 and I really want to have more kids. But this is the one condition in the world where we just let children self-diagnose themselves and we celebrate them right away. We say, yay for you. I'm so glad you found your true self. You are stunning and brave. Wow, amazing. Let's get you started on puberty blockers. Let's get these little girls started on testosterone so they can grow beards, get deep voices. Let's schedule that surgery. Let's get you on GoFundMe, where there are more than 42,000 girls right now raising money to get a double mastectomy for gender-related purposes. That's just if you enter the search words top surgery. If you enter the search words double mastectomy, you'll find some for cancer, you'll find some for gender purposes. And that's just on GoFundMe. Never mind all the other sites. So this is just an absolutely massive epidemic. Every single high school where this is taught, you have numerous children now saying that they're trans, and it's really affecting the girls. And I was just at Brown University, which is an Ivy League university in Rhode Island last week. Nicole Solis, I think it's Nicoletta0602 on Twitter. Everyone should follow her. She's awesome. She came out with me. And she can attest to what we witnessed. And I've been seeing this for more than a year and a half now. I didn't get one encouraging comment from a young woman on campus. Now, some were silent, and who knows what they're thinking. I got tons of hate from the women. Almost no hate from the young men, and tons of support. There has never been a clearer binary on this issue. This is affecting women, and it's affecting effeminate men. The masculine guys are not buying this, but they don't know about it either because our media won't report on this. And when the media does report on it, CNN and everyone, they're presenting this as a beautiful thing. So this is a massive propaganda campaign that has been extremely successful, orchestrated by all of these LGBTQ organizations. And we should really just call them TQ organizations because they have nothing to do with LGB anymore. And like all activist organizations, when they achieve their goals, which these LGB organizations did achieve their goals to win gay rights, they don't just shut up shop and fire everybody. They have to keep the donations flowing. They got to keep everyone employed. So the attention moved from gay rights onto these transgender extremist nonsense issues. And like I said before, the Democrats up here in Canada, every political party, they refuse to say no to this radical wing of their party because they'll get blasted. And so what we have is queer theory gone totally mad. And to sum up queer theory in a nutshell, queer theory is this radical stuff coming out of universities, really, which is why I'm going to universities, because that's where this stuff is most crazy. Mm-hmm. It basically teaches that everything that's abnormal, we need to make normal. So take whatever perversion, weird fetish, whatever, make that normal. As soon as that becomes normal, though, it's not queer anymore. Now it's just normal. So then the next radical idea has to come in. And this is going to keep escalating. And honestly, the Democratic Party is just going to kind of blow themselves up until they finally stand up to these radicals, because parents are waking up. Red states are waking up. They're starting to ban these procedures. Just yesterday, I think it was, Alabama banned all these procedures on kids. Drugs, the hormones, the surgeries. Florida just issued guidance basically debunking every myth about this. And hopefully they get some laws passed soon. But that was still a really good step for them. Florida's doing amazing. But yeah, we just need to keep having conversations about this, because we are absolutely on the right side of history. And I know in 5 or 10 years' time, we are going to look back at this with absolute horror at what we did to all these kids. And when you look at the stories of these detransitioners, they don't detransition usually in a year or 2 or 3. These young girls, for example, when they get put on testosterone, they feel better right away, because it's a class 3 drug and it causes them to feel better. It would make me feel better. It would make you feel better. It reduces their anxiety. It increases their confidence. It's going to redistribute their body fat, which these girls are going to like. It's going to stop their periods from happening, which all these girls are going to like. And so they're happy for a while. And they're in this cult that's love bombing them all the time. So they're getting all these endorphins from all this love and attention that they're getting. And it takes years for them to work themselves out of this. And oftentimes it takes 10, 12 years until these detransitioners start onto that path.
Yeah.
So we're not going to hear a lot of these stories for many more years still, but more and more and more detransitioners are coming out all the time. So we need to amplify their voices more than any. And there are some documentaries going on right now. I'm actually going to be interviewed for a couple of them this week in LA.
Oh, good.
But there are some documentaries focusing on these transitioners. So hopefully we get their stories broadcast.
That'll be great. I noticed something in Yeli's story that, going back to the sort of peer pressure thing, I believe it was one of her family members said that over the summer she was encouraged to join one of these LGBT, clubs, or it was more like a GSA club, Gay Straight Alliance. So they kind of lure the kids in saying it's a gay straight alliance, so that sometimes kids who are straight, in other words, they're not queer or they're not gay, they're just sort of confused. They're searching to belong to something. And they think, oh, okay, somebody invites them and they go and they join the GSA. And there in the club, I think she got a fair amount of pressure. And then over the summertime, apparently she felt better. I think, or something, that she started to like ease up, and her, I don't know if it was her brother or somebody said that she was seeming happier. And then as the school year approached, she mentioned something like, I'm going to be pressured to go back to those club meetings, or I'm going to have to go back in that club, that she didn't feel like she could just leave the club. And I wonder about that, because we know, for example, that the California Teachers Union has put, a lot of programs in place to create, help people create these clubs. They've been supporting this. We've found materials where, they're recruiting for these clubs, and they do put pressure on members to stick around, like a cult. And the one place no one's really looking, it's all in the parents. Like, you're not affirming. Like, maybe the problem is you, meaning like the school. With Yeli's story, I can't help but feel like this sweet, lovely little girl may well have been bullied, or just may have had chronic, kind of a clinical depression that is very common in young girls, and then got bullied on top of it and went into that situation. In other words, we don't really see this phenomenon amongst homeschooled kids, do we? We don't really see this phenomenon like everywhere. It's primarily kids in school. Am I right?
Yeah. So a lot of them get introduced to it in school, and a lot of them do get more heavily indoctrinated in school. It depends on the teacher they get. These GSA or QSA clubs, whatever they call them, Queer Straight Alliance, as sometimes they're called, are absolutely pushing this. I released audio last year of a teacher in Toronto, a 12-year-old student in this guy's class recorded this teacher giving a lesson on gender identity. And this same teacher runs the GSA club at that school. And he's sitting there telling these kids about 5 different times during half an hour that parents don't understand. Your parents and grandparents, this wasn't acceptable when they were younger, and they don't understand. And the overwhelming message is that we understand you here.
That's what cults do.
That's right. So they're driving this wedge in between the parent-child relationship.
Yeah.
And these people don't want kids to be who they truly are. They want them to be trans.
Right.
And we know this because every single person who detransitions, all of their trans community cut them off right away. They shun them like Jehovah's Witnesses or like Scientologists that have left the cult. It's the same exact tactic in play. They don't want them to be who they really are. They don't want them to try and find their true self and be truly happy. They just want them to be trans because it's buying legitimacy for their gender religion.
It's so transparent. I mean, you have a confused kid who's unhappy and goes and, the school counselor says, I'm not happy. Things are I don't know what's going on. I don't feel good. They only ever have one answer. It's not like that, where did depression go? Where did generalized anxiety disorder go? Where did the beginnings of bipolar disorder go? Where did any number of other problems that used to be associated with adolescence and were relatively common. In other words, especially if you're looking at the comorbidities of ADHD and, autism spectrum disorder. It's like they're gone, and they're now there's only one cause. There's only one reason for you to be confused as you're going through puberty is you're in the wrong body. And the fix is to change the kind of body you're in, which of course is impossible, but they say that. And then they say, and then your depression will go away, and then your anxiety will go away, and then all these other things will go away. It's like no one's looking at it as maybe that solution sounds appealing because it sounds like a fix for my depression, or it sounds like a fix. You're making it sound like it's going to make me less sad, or it's going to make me understand myself. I think these poor kids are confused, and someone's coming in with here's the answer. And that person, as I said, they're older, they have a hierarchical position that's above them, and yet this perception of trust and just trustworthiness. And I also want to ask you, Chris, what about the parents in these scenarios? I mean, in Yaley's case, the mom was just trying to be supportive and just kind of go along with it, and they took it right out of her hands immediately.
Yeah.
But what about the parents who are having eat the teat parties?
Yeah.
And the ones posing for pictures with their kids? I mean, it seems to me like there's a strong correlation between like a Munchausen's by proxy kind of a syndrome, or narcissism, or I don't know what you want to call it, but what about that?
Yeah, it's weird. And it's almost always the moms. I don't get it. But this whole thing is capturing the female population. Like at the university, it's all the women who are into this ideology. And I understand that to some degree. Women tend to be more compassionate. In this case, all these young university students, the young women, know other girls who have transitioned. There's other girls going to the university, several of them at every university. I ran into 10 trans people when I was down at the University of Washington a few weeks ago. Almost all of them young women who've transitioned. So they want to have compassion for their friends, and I get that. And women are more empathetic, and I'm sure they understand more what these girls are going through too, because they went through some of these problems themselves going through puberty. They hated it and everything. Mm-hmm. And it's women taking all these gender studies courses. They don't call them women's studies anymore. They call them gender studies.
Right.
Because the word woman is being erased. That's another issue I take a great issue with myself, because I got 2 girls. I'm not happy sending them into a world that doesn't know what a woman is. But
exactly.
Yeah, this has just totally captured the young female population. More than 90% of the abuse I get when I'm on the street is from these young females. And I don't know I forget where I was going with this, but we need to get the truth out there, because they don't know it. They're only being lied to by these university professors. The number one thing I hear all the time is, kids aren't being sterilized, honey. That's not happening. Well, yes, it is. Or they're not doing surgeries on children. Okay, spend 1 minute Googling and you'll find all sorts of stuff. They just don't believe these things are happening, which is one of the things that makes these discussions more difficult, because it's so crazy and it's so insane. Look, almost nobody wants to be sterilizing kids. They all get that. They don't believe it's happening. So you need to be able to have these conversations in such a way that you can talk about it with compassion. Right. I think sometimes with conservative circles, they're almost too divisive and wanting to blame the left. And it is the left that is pushing this, but we need to be able to reach the left as well. And if you come at this from an angle where you turn them off right away, it's not really helpful. But I've learned how to have these conversations with people and get through to them if they're in a mindset where they're at all willing to listen. If they don't want to listen and they're just swearing at me or whatever, you can't really get too far. But with those people, what I'll do is just say something that they can't help but agree with. Right. And what everyone agrees with is that we should not be putting these children in some stereotypical box. If a girl's more masculine, if a boy's more effeminate, no big deal. Fine. Beautiful. Celebrate their creativity. And when I say these things, people get so confused, because usually the sign I have on my front says children cannot consent to puberty blockers, or I have my definition of a dad, which is a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology. That one upsets some people. Other people love it. Children are never born in the wrong body. Gender ideology does not belong in schools. I have different messages that I wear on my body like a sandwich board. But, we all agree that we don't want kids coming to harm. It's just that the propaganda from the left has been so successful.
Right.
And it is propaganda. It's misinformation. It's disinformation. They're lying to everyone. And people are just buying it because they're hearing it from authority figures. So we simply need to get the truth out there. So I'm hoping someone can step up with a few $100,000 to fund a documentary series. We need a high budget, super well produced documentary series, about 8 episodes long, that interviews detransitioners in each episode, interviews some of these parents like Abigail Martinez, and goes into all these separate issues about what's going on in schools, how they're hiding this from parents. Organizations like the Transition Closet, which now sets up closets in schools so kids can come change their clothes, hide this from parents. They even provide binders to girls to wear that crush their breast tissue down and cause damage. And then they change back into their clothes before they go home. This whole thing is insane. But we need to expose this in such a way that it reaches the left and the right. And we need to have a proper series done. And I know it's maybe going to be hard to get it distributed right away. But if you build it, if you produce it properly and you get it distributed to all the film festivals, someone will pick it up. So this would be a good investment for someone. So if there's any millionaires out there watching,
I agree. And
big plans.
I think one question I would ask people on the left is, if you call yourself a feminist, if you are somebody who fought for, more sort of gender neutrality of the, literal kind, where it's like, I'm just going to judge you on what you're capable of and who you are as a person, as an individual, then why are you not rejecting the stereotyping and it's not just stereotyping, it's sexual stereotyping. It's, girls are girly girls. They're the girls who, if you have girly traits and girly tendencies, well, that's what makes you a girl. Women feminists fought for ages against that. I shouldn't have to wear dresses. I shouldn't have to wear heels. I shouldn't have to wear hose to work. I should be able to wear a suit. I should be able to, work as a construction worker. I shouldn't have to, I'm a woman, but I could be Rosie the Riveter, or I could be, a wife or whatever. And so where are you people? Okay. See, this is what J.K. Rowling gets. And she's, the old kind of feminist, like, what are you doing? And then on the other side, I look to the right and I say, what are you doing with your churches, folks? Because I'm seeing churches, synagogues, religious schools. A friend of mine just wrote me the other day and she said the Jewish schools where she lives are all in on this. They're all in on the, affirmation, everything. And I have to ask, I'm like, so God makes mistakes. Right. So where is your religious doctrine? Because if you're saying that you have this all-powerful, almighty God who is, infallible, does not make mistakes, why would God put someone in the wrong body? Why would God do that? And why would the people have to act against his creation to such a degree and start playing God in order for the child to be whole? In order for the child to be whole and happy and thriving, does that make any sense to you? And if it does, then you might as well just go and throw your Bible right out the window, because it's null and void. It's null and void. Everything it says in there about women, everything in there it says about men, and why what men and women exist, and how they were made by God, and all of that. And I'm not even a religious person. I'm just saying, I'm seeing people who are say, but we're about compassion and loving and this and that. Like, you are literally rejecting God's creation. You're literally saying God made mistakes. Not just made mistakes to the tune of, 50% of one psychiatrist or psychologist patients. That's a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I use this argument all the time, actually. I say, whether you believe in creation or evolution, this makes no sense. Obviously, if you believe in creation, well, yeah, like you just said, God doesn't make mistakes. If you believe in evolution, as I do, so humans have been around on this planet for 300,000 years or so. We evolved over hundreds of millions of years.
Yep.
Our bodies are these incredibly complex and magnificent organisms with billions of processes going on every day. We don't even understand all the things going on. We don't understand how hormones affect the brain. And now, in this tiny little blip in history of 300,000 years, some psychopaths have decided that we can alter the biology of a child and cut off their body parts. And this is going to make them better. And they lie and say that kids will kill themselves if we don't do this. We've been on this planet for 300,000 years. Kids weren't killing themselves because they were going through puberty. Ever.
Exactly. Show me how many 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, even 15-year-olds when we were young and this wasn't even an option. How many were just killing themselves because they were like, "Oh no, I don't like my body." I mean, you mentioned tomboys, and I was one. And when I was growing up, I lived on a street where it was mostly boys. I lived in one of those suburban streets in New Jersey up until I was about 13, where it was just it was a cul-de-sac, so people would go out in the street, ride bikes, play, and it was almost all boys. It was only one girl that lived next door, and so all my best friends in the neighborhood were boys. I used to play baseball with them. I'd ride around in somebody else's big wheel because I didn't have one. Everybody who watches me knows that. I was jealous. We played GI Joes. We did the little Green Army Men things. We played capture the flag. We did all kinds of lifting up, looking for bugs. And I loved it. I was all in on it. I played on an all boys soccer team because we didn't have a girls soccer team. When I started to develop, when I started to become like a woman, okay, I was so mad because I felt like I was now becoming separate from my best friends in a way that was going to be noticeable, that, might cause a rift kind of a thing, like I'm looking more like a girl and not like the little pseudo boy that I looked like. And I was nervous. Like, is this going to change our relationship? Am I not going to be able to play on the team anymore? You have all these thoughts, but it wasn't because I didn't want to be in my body. I just was nervous about change. Kids are brand new on this planet, and change is scary to all humans. Getting older. Okay, we're all adults. When a woman hits menopause or a man loses his hair or anything, no offense, but like
I have so much hair, Deb. I just lost a little here, but I have lots of hair. I just choose to shave it.
You know what I mean? But
Two
I'm
little
just saying,
cul-de-sacs.
like, we
It's all
go
good.
through changes, and a lot of them represent themselves, show themselves physically, and it causes anxiety. It causes like, what's happening now? I look at my face and I'm like, that wasn't there before, So the challenge is kids have fewer resources to deal with that. We adults have had decades of learning how to cope with change more, in a healthy way. They're brand freaking new. If you're 8 or you're 9, you're a blip. You're a blip. You've had no life experience to deal with something pretty major. And that is
diapers
puberty.
5 or 6 years ago.
Yes. And
they believe in Santa Claus.
Thank you. And I keep trying to say to parents, like, this is the same kid who, like you said, a few years ago was in diapers, and now they're having changes to their body. Oh, and P.S., and this is something James Lindsay talks about. I want to get your take on. He thinks there's pressure coming like from entertainment and all that to, hypersexualize their environment in terms of their cartoons and the movies they watch and the dolls they play with, Bratz, whatever they were, so such that they can't come at it gradually. There's nowhere they can't avoid. There's porn everywhere. They know what it is to be a little kid, and they see adults, but there is no transition. It used to be when I was growing up, you'd have TV shows that showed kids in that sort of tween age being kids that weren't all the way babies, but they weren't grown-ups. We had all kinds of shows that showed, even the Brady Bunch showed that. Okay. Now it's like little bitty kids, cartoons, whatever. And a lot of those are even being sexualized, and they're playing grown up and having sex. There's no in between. So if you're a kid in that in between, you're like, I don't know. I don't want to do that. I'm not ready for that, because you're not emotionally ready. You're not intellectually ready, but entertainment is going, yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And if you are on the spectrum, or you have ADHD, or you have any other thing that also causes you to mature more slowly, those things keep your emotional maturity on a slower track. It's got to be terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And that's what he's saying, is that they're scared.
Yeah. No kid would ever think of this on their own. No child would ever think they were born in the wrong body or they should be the other sex. It's just, this is adults putting this idea in their head. But I'm going to read you something, because speaking about the entertainment industry, it's also the publishing industry. So I walked into a bookstore the other day, and I'm just finding this here on my phone, with my 10-year-old daughter looking for some books. She's a voracious reader. And she spotted this book right away and rolled her eyes. Both can be true. So let me read the back cover of this. This is the featured book in the 8 to 12-year-old section. it says, Ash is no stranger to feeling like an outcast. For someone who cycles through genders, it's a daily struggle to feel in control of how people perceive you. For someone who cycles through genders, that's insane. It's a daily struggle to feel in control of how others perceive you.
You
This
can't.
This is the stupidest message ever.
We're
supposed to teach our kids, don't worry about what other people think.
Because
you know who you are.
It's like you literally cannot do it.
Correct. And then it's just totally insane. All these publishers, all these authors who write these ridiculous books get funding and they'll get published because there's grants for this sort of nonsense. And
that's terrifying to me that
it's everywhere.
They would be wanting to advance something that is so completely ridiculous. I mean, like, as you said, the one lesson we try to teach our kids, I hope, is you can only control your reaction to things. That's literally the only thing you can control in this life. Everything else is going to be up for, I mean, there's so many inputs, okay? And what you absolutely cannot control is the perceptions of other people. You cannot. Yeah. You can try to influence them, I guess, but control? Give it up. That's a not only a losing battle, that way leads misery. Even attempting it leads to misery.
And so all these books, like, there's nowhere safe for parents who have kids struggling with this. If their daughter's a voracious reader, they almost have to read every single book before they let their daughter read it. Because even if they're not speaking explicitly about trans issues in these books are written as allegories about the trans thing, and it's putting these weird ideas in the kids' heads. But
no, you can't be both a boy and a girl at the same time.
Yeah, you can't be neither. You are a boy or you are a girl, and that's that. And that's all it's ever going to be. And we need to stop playing along with this because we are harming, what society is harming, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids across the Western world. It's going to be into the millions if we don't put a stop to this.
It's really terrifying. But Chris, I can't thank you enough for coming in and, kind of sharing all this with us and sharing the story of Sage. I hope that I refuse to call her Draco. I'm sorry. I hope that she is going to be okay. There's no okay after that. I just hope that she will somehow be able to come through this. And I hope this is something the parents watching or listening will take to heart as far as what to do. I mean, what do you recommend people do other than speaking out? If you've got a child in a school where the policy is affirm only, what do you suggest?
Okay. So here we go. Call to action. Parents need to make noise. They need to go to their school boards. They need to get up to speed on what's happening and go to their school boards. The moms, I would recommend joining an organization, finding a chapter near you of Moms for Liberty. Fantastic group fighting other issues with the schools, growing extremely fast, extremely powerful, very influential politically. In just 16 months that they've been in existence, they've already got 85,000 members and I think 185 chapters across the country. And I'm going to be writing some speeches. I'm probably going to write 3 or 4 different 3-minute speeches that parents can give when they go to these school board meetings. Because unlike in Canada, where we don't even have actual school board meetings anymore that you can go to, they're all virtual and you're not even allowed to ask a question. A teacher who took issue with a couple books in a school library recently got suspended and accused of violating the Ontario Human Rights Act because she had a little bit of concern with a book glorifying sterilization in a school library. But anyway, Canada's insane. You've got way more options to fight this in the United States.
Right.
You've got school board meetings. And as we saw in Loudoun County, Virginia, parents stood up, spoke up, and it changed the entire race of the governor's race. It switched the numbers 20 points basically overnight.
Yep.
And Glenn Youngkin won. But go to these school board meetings.
Work to do. They're still
Oh,
they're
of
still doing
course.
this in the schools in Virginia, though, big time.
Yeah, this girl Sage is from Virginia, and she's from a district that's 80% Republican. So it doesn't even matter so much. There's so many aspects to this. There's schools, and then there's social media, and social media is the worst. So we have this, for the first time in human history, we have all these kids growing up online. All their friends are online. They're online hours a day. It's bad for adults. It's the absolute worst thing possible for kids. You talked about growing up, playing with the boys outside. That's
Yeah.
what kids are supposed to do. They should be outside playing out in nature. But instead, they're online and they're getting indoctrinated, and their minds are very malleable. So we need to put an end to that. But please, parents, go to your school board meetings and raise hell.
Yep, definitely do it. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Everybody, please go visit Chris's website, and to the extent that you can, I would ask you to please consider a donation, because the only way that he is able to travel around and do the things that he does is through the people who support him.
It's true.
And he's pretty much given up his life to do this, right? As far as doing other things. And I, as a mom of 3 girls, I thank you so much, because even if my kids are not in the school, they come across this in their activities, their sort of exercise and extracurricular activities. They run into kids in this situation. They're gonna, if they go to college someday, if they're out there, this is the world. I say we're woke adjacent. You can't get away from it. The most you can do is get your individual kids out of harm's way. But what's happening to their friends? What's happening, like you said, who are they going to socialize with? What's the mindset going to be of the other adults they encounter in their jobs? I mean, one of my kids works at Starbucks. We know what their point of view is, right?
Yeah, a Starbucks employee just called the police on me a few days ago because
Yeah.
I was about to go in to buy something. I wasn't even wearing my signs. I was with Nicole Solis, and 2 guys had stopped me to talk. I was just holding the signs in my hand, and this barista came out and told me to leave. I said, "Nope, now I'm not leaving for sure. Now I'm going to stay here. I wasn't going to, but
Right.
that's my attitude. When people tell me to move, I just stay put."
Good
But
for you.
yeah, I really do need help. That would be great if people can help. I'm heading to Los Angeles tomorrow. I'm going to be at USC, University of Southern California, where tuition is only $60,000 a year to
Only.
learn that boys and girls aren't real.
Right.
So I'm going to have conversations around campus for 3 or 4 days, and we'll see what happens. And I've got these couple interviews coming up for a couple documentaries too. So yeah, I definitely do need help because I'm running into debt.
Yeah.
But that's my problem. People don't have to worry about it, but if they can help, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, we try to get the word out whenever we can. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Please like and share this broadcast so other people can see it as well. This is very, very important information. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Deb.